but I say annual reviews of them.
Kaj pa to pika?
Prenos.
Tudi to gre kot avtomobilaž.
Mogoče me je dal helikopter.
Come on board.
Ja, lepo pozdravljeni, hvala, da ste se odzvali našemu vabilu na novinarsko konferenco. Rada bi predstavila predstavnike pobude za spremljanje medijev, ki je se zdaj tokrat tudi v živo udeležila naše, kaj izgovorim, ki je tokrat tudi v živo se prišla seznaniti z situacijo v Sloveniji. Je pa pobuda teh številnih mednarodnih organizacij že junija izvajala številne intervjuje z predstavniki medijev, vlade, različnih deležnikov. In konec junija, tik pred predsedovanjem Slovenije Svetu Evrope, tudi Evropskemu svetu, tudi pripravlja poročilo, ki je javno dostopno še vedno na naši spletni strani in tudi seveda spletnih straneh članic oziroma članic te pobude. Članice pobude oziroma mednarodne organizacije so situacijo Slovenije spremljale tudi v tem vmesnem času in se odločile torej tudi za ta živi obisk, ki je bil predviden že takrat junija, ampak žal zaradi situacije z epidemijo ni bil mogoč. Tako da v tem trenutku bi prepustila besedo njim. Predlagam, da se kar sami predstavijo, zato ker nekateri imajo imena in priimke, ki jih je težje izgovoriti in bodo to lažje in bolje naredili sami. Tako da izvolite, beseda je vaša. Celotna novinarska konferenca bo sicer potekala v angleškem jeziku, tako da, če pa bi imel kdo vprašanje, ki bi ga želel zastaviti v slovenščini, bomo pomagali z z prevodom. Najprej bodo predstavili svoje ugotovitve, potem pa bodo na voljo tudi za vprašanja in kasneje za izjave. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. And well, you are the ones saying welcome. So, but we are very pleased that there are so many people from the press coming here and have this interest in what we have been able to do. We are 3 organizations: Lawrence Hüting from European Center for Press and Media Freedom, and Danny Weisman from IPI, International Press Institute. Myself, my name is Mogens Bjerregaard. I'm president of the European Federation of Journalists. And what we basically have done is that the 3 organizations, we are here to finalize a fact-finding mission, to follow up on a mission that was made online earlier this year, where my colleagues were present and had made a lot of findings, and we have now followed up today. We have been looking into safety issues, we've been looking into how to rebalance the pluralism in the media, what is the situation for public service media in Slovenia, which we have digged into today, and finally we'll say some words about the international approach, what can be done internationally, because it's obvious that there are some needs here. But I will give the floor first to Lawrence, and he will talk about the safety, and so please take the floor.
Thanks. So there's a number of significant findings from our fact-finding mission that I'd like to highlight. And the first one and defining feature is, or has been, we found the overly aggressive use of social media by members of the government, by public officials, to denounce their alleged critics, their supposed critics, overall giving rise to a really toxic climate for journalists. So very prominently, Prime Minister Janša has accused journalists of lying, of spreading false information and manipulating the public in a series of really personalized attacks. Now, when we questioned government officials about this during our fact-finding mission, these comments by the Prime Minister were defended. It was said that he was simply exercising his right to free speech, and the impact was also played down. They were called trivial repeatedly. In our opinion, not only do these tweets and do these social media attacks constitute a form of government pressure by and of themselves, but they also have been acting as a signposting to followers of the Prime Minister to really pile on the attacks and to also then continue themselves with those. From journalists on the other side of the fence, we heard that these online threats are only rarely taken seriously. Prosecutors rarely indict over hateful comments, and it's extremely rare to see indictments and trials follow through. Women journalists have suffered disproportionately from this increasing hostility. They have to deal with misogynistic abuse, and we've heard from our interlocutors how this rhetoric has really contributed to a normalization of this kind of harassment. Leading then in turn to increased self-censorship by people, and mostly women journalists, who are wary of becoming the next target. This stigmatization and online harassment also spills over into the physical realm, into real life. And it really promotes a climate where journalists are somehow seen as a legitimate target for people to vent their anger and frustration, leading also to physical attacks. These were the findings from our report that we published at the end of June. Things, as you all know, have not improved since then. Just recently, Eugenia Karl received a letter with a threatening note and irritant powder. And just by way of example, like these kinds of attacks don't only affect the journalist who's the immediate target, but also, of course, all of the colleagues very concretely, because there's a building lockdown and all of that, but also, of course, mentally to see to see that this happens to your colleagues and you might be the next one, right? We've also seen an uptick in physical attacks, specifically in the context of protests. It comes from two sides. On the one hand, there have been instances of police brutality. Recently, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Tone Stoico was tear gassed by a police officer while covering clashes during a violent protest. He should be clearly recognizable as a member of the press. Besides this police brutality, there's also a lack of protection against the actions of private individuals, because of course there's two aspects. Not only should the police abstain from this kind of aggression, but they should really work with the journalistic community to ensure that their protection needs are met in the context of reporting on protests. A second aspect of our findings about the Slovenian media landscape from our mission turns on the so-called rebalancing efforts to rebalance the media, which we believe can be framed really as an effort by SDS to attempt to exert greater control, on the one hand over public service media, and my colleague Jamie will talk about that later, but also affecting the commercial media landscape. On the one hand, we're talking about allocation of state money. There's the annual tender for co-financing by the Ministry of Culture, where in 2021 several outlets, investigative media, radio stations were left out. All of them had previously been labeled as allegedly left-wing, politically biased, radicalized somehow. We heard consistent concerns about the narrowness of the selection criteria throughout all of this process, and also the appointment of the commission who advises the Minister of Culture on this, and a majority of them are closely linked to government parties. Other forms of pressure have included, for example, the infamous meeting between Prime Minister Janša and Peter Kellner, and the impact on or potential impact on Pop TV's editorial line. And also we've seen an undue amplifying of pro-government outlets. This includes channeling of state funding to media that are supportive of the government, either through advertising budgets from certain ministries, but also state-owned companies that disproportionately advertise in media that's perceived to be friendly to government interests. Now, all of this is not to say, of course, that on prior or outside of these attacks or these attempts to influence, that the situation was all perfect, right? So there's been historic and ongoing ownership problems as a consequence of the privatization process and how it played out during the democratic transition. And we've seen that owners of these then newly privatized, now privatized outlets have sought to use these new newspapers to advance their own commercial or political interests. We've also seen a lacking implementation of ownership transparency criteria in relation to certain outlets. And of course, there has been, to an extent, an increase in polarization that's quite observable. At the same time, and this is worth stressing, is that while this poses legitimate challenges that should be tackled, that should be addressed, overall the picture, in our opinion, is still one where media outlets and journalists, by and large, remain professional. They adhere to journalistic ethics and standards. And that's our overall view of the landscape, is that this is still, it's a very professional media, and it does not fit this narrative that is pushed by Janša and certain officials in his party, where they are victimized somehow by a radicalized media that doesn't stick with professional standards. We did not find that to be the case at all. With this, I'll pass it on to Jamie.
Thanks, Hans. I think one of the kind of... Thank you. one of the key kind of indicators for press freedom and how healthy press freedom is in a country, and one of the clearest ways to judge a government when its kind of interaction with press freedom is how it interacts with public service media. And I think that interaction over the last year and a half in Slovenia from this current administration has been very clear. 278 days have now passed since the Slovenian press agency last received state funding for carrying out its public service mission. And since the beginning of the year, it's been forced to operate without any public funds guaranteed to it under two separate laws. While what we see as a manufactured contractual dispute is played out with the Government Communications Office. So yeah, when we carried out our mission during the summer, UCOM had twice suspended monthly payments and then refused to sign a new contract for 2021, jeopardizing the STA's financial stability. And at the same time, attacks were being made on STA's management from social media, from top officials within government, who were repeatedly calling for its Director General to be dismissed or to step down, and even alleging that he was a collaborator in the murder of a former colleague, which is obviously an incredibly serious accusation to make. And as Lawrence was saying, since then, as in this issue, little has changed. The reworked public service agreement for 2021, developed by UCOM, includes conditions which would leave the STA's management with a choice between its independence and its existence, essentially. The deal would kind of drastically change its commercial income, disrupt its financial stability, as well as granting UCOM increased oversight over its work and its reporting. STA views this deal as a threat to its independence and to its ability to carry out its public service mission, which is a conclusion that we share. And it's our belief that this dispute has been intentionally drawn out over many, many months as part of a process to drain the agency of resources, to heap pressure on its management, and ultimately to back the STA so far back against the corner that it has no choice but to accept the conditions or face insolvency. So that leaves us where we are today. 278 days later, the STA is still without funding despite these two laws. This makes it a rule of law issue as well as a media freedom issue in our view. Its staff, as we've heard, are under extreme pressure, facing depression, anxiety, simply for wanting to do their job free from interference. And it's having a major impact on the newsroom and its ability to function properly. And I think the bottom line is that if the STA doesn't receive any funding within the next few months, immediately the jobs of 80 members of staff, journalists and others are at risk. And if it was to be silenced, a key part of the Slovenian media ecosystem would fall silent. That would be not just drastic for the staff who work there, but also for media as well, others who use their reporting. And I really think it would be damaging for Slovenia's democracy ultimately as well. But as we've heard during the previous mission and just today as well, it's not just STA. We've also seen renewed pressure on the public broadcaster, RTVS. As we kind of outlined in our reports, after coming to power, the Prime Minister launched a number of very serious accusations describing the broadcaster as a media killer, totalitarian, and painting it as some kind of antecedent of the former communist broadcaster. We've also seen work to kind of discredit its journalists. This again has come from top ministers, which we believe is aimed at kind of lowering public trust and discrediting its work. We've heard its staff face harassment online, essentially on a daily basis, as well as Lawrence mentioned, active intimidation, threats, threatening letters getting sent in the post with irritating powder. This isn't happening elsewhere. And I think, we saw this hostility really reach a peak a couple of weeks ago when the newsroom was stormed by protesters, anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown protesters, who disrupted its operations and harassed staff. And at the same time as everything this is going on, we're also seeing that the public broadcaster is under severe financial pressure as well. And while it's clear reform is needed to shore up its finances and create a sustainable model for the future, constant battles over oversight bodies and politicization of the bodies kind of overseeing its work is meaning that these key issues around sustainable financing are not getting the attention it needs because of constant battles over political appointments, this kind of thing. So I think overall we're really seeing the need for much lessening of political influence over the public broadcaster, to democratize the body. We saw that there was legislation brought forward which would have democratized and had more space for civil society on those bodies, and yet this legislation wasn't passed in the end. So moving forward, I think we would support any form of legislation which would change the system to lessen the influence of politics on a public broadcaster. So I think everything taken together, which I've just mentioned, it really shows the RTV as well as the STA. They're both under pretty unprecedented pressure right now, which is having a serious effect on press and media freedom in Slovenia. Overall our organisation sees some real challenges there, which right now, serious work to address.
Thank you. I would like now to, after listening to all those findings, I think it's important at this stage also to stress that this is not only something about Slovenia. This is about Europe. We have during the last 5, 10, 15 years seen a decline of media freedom in some of the European countries, and it is spreading to more countries. So while we have seen this deterioration being spreading, we also know how important it is to stop it, because if not, we will see more and more countries get into such a situation. So that's why it's also important for the rest of Europe what happens in Slovenia, what has happened in Hungary, what has happened in Poland, what is happening in other countries as well. If you go a bit more east, it's much more appalling. I know that, but political leaders, they get ideas from each other also. So while now the political leaders in Europe today is meeting not that far from here, I think it's very, very important that they take into account what the role the media plays for democracies in Europe. It's such a fundamental pillar that it's so important for EU to safeguard free, independent, pluralistic media that are sustainable, that can give the public, the citizens, impartial information, so everybody can take part in the democratic development of Europe. And I'm looking at this at the European level because I think it's important. And it is really on time that the EU Commission now has made a sort of a package for media and journalism. Because until now, there have been an exchange of letters, there have been some kind words, nice words. Nothing of that had helped anything. We still have the situation in Poland that we have, we still have the situation in Hungary, and it will deteriorate in your country if nothing else happens. So it's timely. And we really hope that this package coming from the EU Commission now will be more than words and new papers and new letters. Let's talk about 3 topics actually. One thing is that EU is now seriously taking safety as a topic. The second thing is that they are preparing a so-called media action plan. And the third thing is the SLAP directive initiative taken by EU. All of those initiatives is coming from, in particular, one commissioner, namely Vera Jourova from Czechia, who has been keen on making those making a difference. And from our organization side, it's really important now to put as much pressure as possible on this, and on the one hand, of course, support that something has to be happening, but also to make sure that it is something that has an impact and not, as I said, only words. When it comes to safety, we just heard what happens here and what we know what happens around Europe. This year, I just counted 6 killings of journalists in Europe during the last year. And killings of journalists always comes after they have received threats. So we know how this is escalating, and what can happen if we don't stop the threats, if we don't stop the intimidations. So it's really important. So when putting the safety on the in focus from EU, that also means that they should make sure that there will be a review and independent analysis and review of what has happened in each country every year. Because if you don't do that, again, it will be worse. When it comes to the Media Freedom Act, what I know so far is that they want a sort of a legislation where they are able to intervene in the countries. Now they cannot do anything. It would be good if there will be such a possibility to intervene when media freedom is violated. How they will do it, we don't know, but something we are from the EFTA and ECPMF and IPI we are looking into. When it's yes, but today, actually, and EU can do also some practical things. Today, I just want to mention a proposal just came up today when we met some of our key informants. Was it could, for instance, be a sort of a sustainable, what do you call it? A fund, a sustainability fund, where a media like STA, who is in trouble today, could get a loan for a period, so you were able to survive until things has been better. And this is a very, very modest way to do it, but we talk about loans, we are not talking about grants and things like that. But so, I mean, there could be ideas, and I think it's important to put a lot of ideas on the table on what practical things could be done. Then let me turn to what Lawrence said about and I think you mentioned also, Jamie, about the state leaders. We don't need state leaders telling us what we should do as journalists and how we should behave. What we need from state leaders and government leaders is protection of free media and free speech and protection of journalists. We don't need them to educate us. We know, all of us, that we have our responsibility. We know that we have to live up to ethical standards and so on and so forth. We don't need our governmental leaders to educate us. What we need, and this is really, really important now, because we have seen that in so many countries, how state leaders, through their rhetorics, have been able to create more and more intimidation of journalists. We've seen in Europe, we've also seen in other big countries how this happens. So this is really important to emphasize that when and it's not about using a free. I have a free speech. Of course, state leaders and governments, president, prime ministers, they have their free speech, but they really when they are saying something, it matters, and word matters much more than we sometimes believe. We have seen that's why words are under pressure in wars. That's why words are so important when you have conflicts. So what we need and what I hope and what I would urge the EU Commission and what I would urge the state leaders and government leaders today when they have their summit meeting is to agree on and urge their colleagues to support free media, free journalism, independent journalism, full stop. This is important. Getting a bit back to what can be done at the national level, we have now 3 instruments. We have the instrument from the Council of Europe, the recommendation on safeguarding, securing the safety of journalists. We have the UN Plan of Action for Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity that urges each country to create a national action plan where the authorities, the journalists, the media together commit themselves for making sure that journalists can act freely and without risk And we have the third thing is coming now with the EU as a safety plan. But the bottom line, we have to stop this deterioration of violation of press freedom in Europe. It has been worse during the last years. It has to be stopped now, and those who can stop it are the state leaders and the prime ministers, and they have to do it now. We are 5 minutes past 12. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, please.
I would like to ask, okay, we will survive. National television, radio, I think we will survive until the next election, but STA won't. And it's happening in one month or 2 months' time. What can Europe do? European Commissioner, what does she say? You mentioned the fund, you mentioned media act, media action plan. Can we save the STA right now? Because it won't last until the end of the year. And we know that Prime Minister won't give them the money because he's...
Yeah, if I could fix this...
Yeah, I know, but... I know better
yeah, but what we can do is to raise the awareness. Yeah. By having, you have now this press conference where we are raising awareness about the STA, raising awareness about what happens in the public service, raising awareness about the situation for media. I'm not naive, and it would be wrong to say that would be solved in 2 months' time. We need more than that, and of course we need the pressure that we as an organization can put on it, and I'm sure your organization also putting all the pressure that you can do. That's actually why I think it was on the very, very short-term basis. It was an interesting proposal to create such a fund. If it's possible, and such a short notice, I doubt. I have to say, I have to be frank here, because it doesn't help just to say that. Well, I think if we just do so and so, then it will help. And you need all the media to assist and support on making sure that you have this media freedom in Slovenia. It's not only a fight for STA; it's a fight for all media in your country. It's a fight for.
On the verge of collapsing.
I know. Yeah, I know. But I try to answer your question, and as I said, I have no quick fix on it. I don't know if you have any quick fix.
I mean, I think, moving forward, we've understood and heard exactly how dire the situation is at the STA, and there's a matter of months left until they face insolvency. But I think this case has really illustrated the need for some form of fund from the European Commission when independent journalism is threatened in this way, that the EU can step in with an emergency support fund. This can be, a kind of a one-off payment, or a loan in some way that can be paid back. But in these cases where it needs to be done immediately, some form of amendment of this would be a very strong thing for the EU to look at, I think, going forward.
Actually, the recovery plan, the recovery funds that all the countries got should be. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we've seen that in many countries that the media has been simply let out of those recovery funds, and the Commission has regretted it. They didn't on time make it very, very precisely that media should be supported during the recovery fund. But this is just to mention it. I think it's important that you also mention this recovery plan, the recovery funds from the EU, because it's I know it's linked to COVID situation, but in anyhow, I think you should mention it, and you should push for it. Just trying to be to find some tools that could be used at the short term, maybe even by a loan.
Can I ask a question? Uroš Kramer from Dnevnik newspaper. You mentioned the media situation in Poland and in Hungary, and then compared it to briefly to Slovenian situation. Can you maybe mention some details? What is similar, what is different?
No, it's difficult to say what is similar and what is different, because there are three different countries. And even when you talk about Poland and Hungary, we have to be very, very careful not to say that this is this is same. It's not. It's two very different situations. While I'm saying it is that we are seeing more countries in Europe where the state leadership, the government leaders, they are using media in a way that they shouldn't do it. I mean, they are misusing media for propaganda and not using them as they should do for impartial information to the citizens, independency and so on. What will happen to public service media? I think it was mentioned also, both to STA and also if in worst case scenario with public service radio and television. I'm not so much, I cannot say exactly what will happen to those, but what is the risk is, what we are seeing in some countries, that the public service media is turning back into being state media. And when that happens, then you have the total control from, of the media from the government. So and public service media is something that was born in Europe. So public service media has balanced the media landscape in many European countries, starting with the BBC, and then it all over Europe we have seen the public service flourishing and making this a balanced situation for media. So you have private media, commercial media, public service media, and when this the former Soviet and Soviet influenced countries became members of the EU, it was a clear plan that of course now those media should be public service media, and started to do this. What we unfortunately is seeing now is that in some of those countries they are turning back into state media. I'm not saying it's a situation now in Slovenia, but it's a risk, and it's be very, very careful not that this not will happen. We have seen too many countries now where public services are going back into being state media, and then you don't have the free and independent media anymore.
Can I maybe respond to the question as well?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. Just to respond to the question about the kind of the similarities that we see between Hungary, Poland, and now Slovenia. Yeah, I think Moons is of course right that each country has its own unique characteristics, but I think there are some key elements that we can see across the board in all three countries. This involves the kind of discrediting professional and critical journalists, dividing the journalistic community down kind of ideological or political lines, depicting media as a kind of simply a polarized left and right, where that's just simply not the case. Also reaching for control over public broadcasting, the kind of low-hanging fruit of the system, attacking independent journalism at press agencies as well, manipulating state advertising to kind of distort the market, stacking the deck against critical and independent media. All of these are forms of different pressure, and again it happens differently in each country. But all three countries have kind of used this model, which we see as being developed by Orban and the Fidesz party in Hungary. And of course, while we have to stress there's a long way to go before Slovenia is anywhere close to where Hungary and Poland are right now, but it's that we see those key elements being replicated in their own forms that is so concerning. And I think we also have to stress that despite all of the pressures that we've all mentioned in the last 25 minutes, Slovenian independent journalism is still thriving. The situation for press and media freedom is still strong. Slovenia ranks very highly on the Press Freedom Index. And we see excellent reporting during the pandemic and high quality independent newspaper. There's a vibrant scene here still. We've also seen incredible support and solidarity from both the media and the associations, unions, this kind of thing. So there is a lot of hope. But it's exactly because Slovenia has such a high level of press and media freedom and seeing these kinds of attacks, that's why it's so concerning. Because if it can happen here, then it can happen anywhere else as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions right now?
Okay. So if not, last chance. But you'll be here, you'll be around. So thank you very much for coming. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.